And for an insight, we are joined from Paris by the director of the EU ASEAN Centre and former World Bank advisor, Mr. Meher Nicholas Versley. Mr. Versley, welcome to the Q News Economic Bulletin. How might the $2.5 billion Australian dollar financial deal between Australia and Nauru impact Nauru's local economy and infrastructure development in the short and long term?
So Nauru is a small country, right? So it's a sizable amount of money, even though the amount is spread over a very long period. So I think it's spread over a period of 20 or 25 years. It's still a lot of money for a confetti state, like a tiny little state. And in a way, the fact that the money is spread is actually quite good, because infrastructure investment is usually done over long-term cycles. So when you're building a huge, airport, port, train station, public transport infrastructure, just to build it will take you 6, 7, 8, 10 years. So having the money coming piecemeal to you every quarter or every year, as opposed to one big lump sum, is actually better in most emerging markets where the risk of corruption is fairly high. So having the money coming, regularly and funding directly social and transportation infrastructure projects is good. It's good money. It's good money. The problem is the optics. The political optics doesn't look good because Prime Minister Albanese initially comes from the left wing of the Labour Party, right? And so for many years, he campaigned and spoke along very different lines, and he accused the previous, sort of conservative liberal governments of, being xenophobic, racist, and mistreating immigrants. And the problem is also on another layer. It's a legal problem, because basically, we use it now. In English law or Anglo-Saxon law, we use the word expediency, which is based on medieval Anglo-French law, to make a long story short. And what is expediency? It is the complete opposite of due process. So due process is the foundation of, Western civilization in a way, and democracy. It means even if you're a foreigner, even if you're an immigrant, even if you're an illegal alien, the justice system will treat you fairly, and they will hear your case before potentially expelling you and deporting you. And people like George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Tony Blair, they said, we don't care about due process. Because of exceptional circumstances, we can throw democracy in the trash can and the legal process with it. And the left, the Australian left, the French left, the American left, the Democrats, they always said, oh no, that is disgusting, that is totalitarian, that is blah, blah, blah. And it's quite remarkable to see center-left policymakers like, Anthony Albanese in Australia adopting these measures, which were until recently perceived as hard right, very right-wing measures.
Mm-hmm. Well, then how could these measures, Australia's accelerated deportation policy, affect its own economic and diplomatic relations within the Pacific region and the international human rights bodies?
So here, the relationship with these confetti, tiny confetti islands between, Singapore and Malaysia to the north and Australia to the south, these tens of, states, they're small, and most of them are small, right? And so when you're small and poor, when you negotiate as a government with Australia or China, you don't negotiate on the same plane, right? It's not like it's a fiction to say that, when the Prime Minister of Vanuatu or Nauru meets the Prime Minister of China and Australia, they have cordial discussions. It's a fiction. So, of course, one of the parties is very, very strong, very, very rich and powerful, and the other party is microscopic, a small statelets surrounded by water in the Pacific Ocean. So what I'm coming at, the balance of power is not in their hand. So basically, they would accept whatever Australia tells them. Now, of course, if Australia is too harsh with them, because in a way they're using them as dumping ground, right? So, let's say that you have, Indonesian, right? Indonesian, Malaysian, Pakistani, Indian illegal immigrants, and instead of sending them back to Yemen or Pakistan, you dump them into the Pacific Islands like Nauru. So you're just throwing them as if you were throwing paper in a trash can. The optics is not nice, and it's also a way of telling the people and the governments of the Pacific states that we don't regard you as equals, and we're treating you like a dumping ground, and it's not nice. So the long-term, psychological, cultural consequences will be negative. But I think in terms of politics, the balance of power is in Australia's favor, and they're putting money. So to as a lubricant, money is the ultimate lubricant of difficult policies, and so to lubricate that difficult, policy, they're putting money on the table, so that the government in Nauru, being poor, they'll be happy to have extra money.
Mm-hmm. So if they are putting money on the table, can you elaborate more on the economic then consequences that might the reduced procedural fairness for deportees that have on Australia's immigration system, efficiency and costs?
Yeah, so for the Australians, it's a good deal, right? Because the cost of living in Australia is very high. It's a rich country. So if you want to abide by the rule to the letter of the law, if you want to give, fair and due process to each and every illegal immigrant, what does it mean if you're Australia? It means, putting them in hotels until their case is heard properly by a judge. It could be a provincial, state-level judge, and then if they're not happy with the result, they can appeal, and then they get to another federal national court. So the process for every individual can take up to 4 or 5 years if they had good lawyers, and they often have good lawyers working for them pro bono for free. So if you add the hotel bills, etc., it's a lot of money. So if you do the math, how much would it cost to Australia to offer due process to each and every illegal immigrant coming in from Malaysia or Pakistan or wherever? And if you do the math of that cost, and you compare it to the money they will give to Nauru over 25 or 30 years, it's a great deal. It's a great deal for the Australian government, because they will save a lot of money. And it's an okay deal for Nauru within limits. What are the limits? It's a small Pacific island. So if the Australians are dumping 2,000, 3,000 illegal immigrants who will be held in what we have to call camps, right? Maybe comfortable concentration camps, but camps, right? If you just throw 2,000 per year onto Nauru, and who will keep them in these camps, it's okay, kind of. But if you start throwing and deporting 10,000 or 12,000 a year to a small Pacific island like Nauru, then it's not okay, because the cost to Nauru will spiral out of control, and demographically you risk destabilizing a small state like Nauru.
Mm-hmm.